جامعة إمرسون بالولايات المتحدة. بول زميل وصديق من أكثر من 15 سنة. درس بجامعة ميريلاند، كمل دكتوراه. تخرجنا سوا من نفس الجامعة. بول اختصاصه التربية الإعلامية، وصار كاتب أكثر من كثير من الكتب والدراسات عن التربية الإعلامية، وتعلم كلمة عربي. كيفكن؟ Alright.
Thanks, Jazz. I don't know anything that you just said about me, so I hope it was good. I hope it was positive, yeah? Okay. So thanks to Jad Milky and everyone here at LAU for welcoming me, and it's wonderful to see you again, or see you here, but this is my 5th time speaking at MDLAB, and it's become one of the great pleasures of my year to be here in Beirut, to be with so many people interested in media literacy and media education, and to be able to share some of my ideas with you, and then hopefully engage in dialogue and discussion throughout the week. If you have any questions, I'm here, and I'm open to talking and engaging with you in any way you'd like. I have 2 talks this week, one this morning and one tomorrow morning. And I thought I would just tell you what I hope to accomplish in these 2 days, and what we'll try to do today and what I'll try to do tomorrow. My talk today is continuing from what Dr. Melky began this morning in just the principles of media literacy. But I want to actually push us, I want to challenge us to go beyond just understanding these statements of what media literacy is or how it works, and to actually help us consider some of the ways that digital technologies, that new partisan culture, that social networks are impacting and challenging the way that we understand media literacy. So I want to take Jad's foundations, and I want to push us further to think more deeply about the way in which not only we can talk about media literacy, but the way in which media impacts us and we impact the media. So today will be some foundational concepts. I'll ask you questions, and I will try to set some frameworks for your whole week of lectures. So different things to think about as you hear from my colleagues and other colleagues on specific topics about the media. My lecture tomorrow will be on fake news and civic engagement, which is around a new book I'm writing now, but it will really challenge us to try to define and understand what fake news means, and how citizens are working to combat fake news, and how citizens are using technologies to find ways to meaningfully engage with their communities. So this talk is going to be a general overview, and that talk will be more specific on that topic. Okay? If you have any questions at any time, just please raise your hand. We have microphones, and I'll be using them throughout. So please let me know if you have any questions. So I'll just give you, hold on. I'll just give you a little bit of background of who I am, so you know. Tomorrow I will tell you a story about my family, because it's part of the discussion. So you can learn all about my family tomorrow. Today you only get to learn about me. I'm a professor at Emerson College, which is in Boston, Massachusetts, and it's a college devoted entirely to media and art. So it's devoted entirely to filmmaking and journalism and performance and writing, and it's right in the middle of Boston. Has anyone been to Boston before? Okay, yeah, a few people. The rest should come visit. You're all welcome at Emerson College. Come and say hello. I teach there in civic media and digital media and technology and media literacy. I also run a graduate program, which one of our students here has been accepted into. Is Hussein here? There? Has been accepted into that program. We've started a new master's program in civic media, art and practice. It's a 12-month graduate program in Boston, where we work with communities to help them use media to solve problems they have. And then I work at a research lab at Emerson, where we build technologies to help citizens engage more in their communities. And then lastly, as Jad showed you already, Jad and I have been friends for quite a long time. He's much older than I am, So you know, I don't want to confuse that, but we have been friends for a long time. I was very young and he was already having children. And we together began the Salzburg Academy on Media and Global Change 11 years ago. And we have been, I have been as helpful as I can to Jad building MDLAB, and he has been very helpful to me in building this. So it really shows that good friends and good partnerships are important when you're trying to build interesting things. Okay, so that's a little bit about me. Here's some work, just so you know where I come from. I write a lot on media literacy and civic engagement. This is kind of my research area. Has to do with the ways in which media literacy can be used to empower people to engage and act in their communities. So I'm interested not only in pedagogy, I'm not only interested in critiquing the media, I'm interested in the way that people, individuals, young people use media to solve problems in the world. These problems can be health related, they can be about the environment, they can be about women's rights and minority rights, but how they actually use media. So media literacy to me is at the core of teaching people how to effectively understand and create media to solve community problems. So this is where my writing and research is. And this is some of the work, and I'm happy to share this work with you if you're interested in reading more about it. I don't read it myself, but you might want to read it. Okay, so today's talk is about media literacy. I'm going to start where Jad started, but I'm going to ask you a few questions to push you further into thinking about this idea of media literacy being a necessity for global and digital culture. Okay, and I put here a picture that has nothing to do with media because my argument will be that media literacy really as a set of skills and dispositions has very little to do with the skills and more to do with how you approach engaging in communities. And the media is simply a tool we use. The skills are easy to use. How we engage is a bit more challenging. I start with a quote by Howard Rheingold, and he writes this. This is why I think this is necessary. He wrote a book in 2012 where he said, "The future of digital culture, yours, mine, and ours, depends on how well we learn to use the media that have infiltrated, amplified, distracted, enriched, and complicated our lives." So his argument in his book, which is an argument that I follow, says that the future of our societies should not be dictated by the people who create the technologies, that dictate the boundaries of the technologies, but it's how we choose to use and misuse technologies, and how we can place them or misplace them in important ways to help us figure out how to best engage them for our own purposes. So I put this to you as a frame for our discussion. Jad put this up. It's a quite basic discussion. The definition, media literacy is the ability to access, analyze, evaluate, create, and act. This definition is very broad. It doesn't really have much meaning unless we start to direct it into things that we can actually feel and see and understand its implication for us. So my goal is to take this and actually just complicate it a little bit in this next hour. Here's another thing that Jad said that I'll put back up here, and to say this provides us a really nice foundation. This provides us kind of the big framework to say, okay, so these are things that we understand that are happening in the world with media. But I want to, and I think the discussion is good here, and I want to pull back from this 1 second and understand that media messages are constructions, that they construct reality, that they negotiate meaning, that they have commercial implication, and they have ideological and values associated with them. I think we all understand this, and your responses were very eloquent, and they were very appropriate, and they were very they were very thorough. So, but I want to ask, if you had this question, taking aside all of the academic, like you give really good, thorough answers, and if I were just to ask you, put a microphone around the room now, and ask you, what does it mean to be media literate? How would you respond to that? What does it mean to be media literate? Yeah, I'll take a couple answers. That would be great. Just to think at a human level. What does it mean? Can you? Are you speaking English? Oh, okay. Can you turn the microphone on? It's not on. The microphone?
Hi. It's working now. So I believe being media literate, it's like you have the power over what you receive. You control what you receive.
Okay, perfect. So being media literate means you have power.
Yeah, you have power. You don't let the media manipulate your brain,
Right,
manipulate
right.
your ideas, and so on.
Good, so I like this. So power is very core. This idea, if we want to be media literate, we have to have a sense that we have power to control the way that we individually approach media and the way that we dictate the messages that we consume and also create. I like that.
I agree with my colleague, and I want to also add that to be media literate means to act. Because in the most cases, we perceive the people, we perceive the consumers like victims by the media, but that's not the case. Consumers can think, consumers can act, consumers can think critically about the things they receive by the media. I think that media will exist, has been existing for many years. It's gonna keep existing. The thing is how consumers shape the things they perceive.
Right. Okay, so this is great. So I'm hearing really interesting. So we have power and then we have act. These are two words. Let's keep those, power and act. Did you want to? Yeah, go ahead.
أن تكون مثقفا إعلاميا يعني أن تعرف الحدود القصوى للتأثير بالاتجاهات السلبية والإيجابية وأين تستطيع أن تتدخل لتقليل التأثيرات السلبية وفرض زيادة على التأثير الإيجابي.
Okay, I caught some of that.
أقول ثاني أعيد. يعني أن تكون مثقفا إعلاميا يعني أن تكون لديك القدرة على معرفة الحدود القصوى للتأثير بالاتجاهات السلبية والإيجابية وكيف يمكن تقليص مساحة سلبية التأثير وأن نرفع من مساحة الإيجابية في التأثير للمواد الإعلامية.
I like that. So this idea about limitations, understanding our boundaries as humans and the impact we have on others. So action, power, limitations. Yeah, let's take a couple more. Go ahead.
أعتقد أن المثقف الإعلامي هو الذي يعي بما يدور حوله من رسائل مختلفة سواء كانت إيجابية أو سلبية وأن لا ينخدع بسهولة بكل هذه الرسائل بكل بساطة. شكرا.
Okay, so I like this. All right, so we can do. Let's do one more. Did you have you had your hand up in the back here? Can you go back? Yeah. No. Yeah. So not to be fooled. So this idea of awareness, that's another big one, right? So power, action, limitations, awareness. Now you see we're getting to the more human values that are associated with media literacy. Let's take one more and then we can move on.
There is a very famous phrase I like very much. It's don't hate the media, be the media. It's ça résume.
Don't hate the media, be the media. So in that idea is that we don't simply critique the media and then turn away. We are not cynical, but if we are the media, if we find the way to be the creators of the media, then we can push things forward. Okay, do we want to do one more? Did you want to talk? Yeah, we can do one more and then we'll go on.
Hi. I'm just going to add one point, and I'm sure there will be sessions devoted more to that angle, which is the technology, knowing the capacity of what you have at your hand. Whether it's a smartphone or a laptop or whatever it is, knowing the capacity and the extension of how it can go and what you can do with it.
So this is perfect. We didn't plan this, but you just gave the perfect transition into thinking about technology. Thank you very much. That was good. So I agree. So we're going to talk about that in 1 second. But when we think about what it is to be media literate, I want us to think not about just how we detach and stand back and understand how to critique things, but I want us to understand on a very human level, what does it mean to set our own limitations? What does it mean to have boundaries? What does it mean to be aware? What does it mean to have power? What does that feel like to have power? Does it feel like you know how to create an attractive YouTube video? Does it mean you know how to talk back to media when you disagree? What do these things mean? And this is, I think over the next course of MDLAB, you need to challenge yourselves to not simply be able to stand back and say, I can be media literate because A, B, and C, but understand on a very human level, what does it mean? Understanding that we have complicated relationships with media, understanding that we have human values and ideologies. The media doesn't have, in this statement, the media do not contain ideological messages. I think humans contain ideological messages and values. The media do not contain them. If you do this, you justify the media as something that is like a powerful machine. We have values and ideologies, and oftentimes we try to put those aside and we put the blame on the media for their ideologies. We need to start thinking about our own ideologies and values. And so this is what I want to complicate here. So just to finish the beginning of this, this is kind of media scholars have talked about this a lot, and I think you'll see more and more of this. The media, it's often argued, have taken the place of the family, the church, and the school as the major socializing influence in contemporary society. Not the major kind of personal or human, but socializing, how we learn about things, how we learn about peers. Media has integrated into all of these spaces, into the home, into our spaces of learning, and into our spaces of reflection. That media has become very core to these spaces, and so we need to figure out how we can respond to this ubiquitous state. The other thing that Jad mentioned that I'm going to focus on now is this idea of what you guys said, that media literacy has inevitably sought to balance the need to protect people from the media with the need to empower people to effectively use the media. So media literacy always kind of goes back and forth between we need to protect people from harmful messaging to children, from political, populist, extremist rhetoric. We need to teach people how to be critical consumers about that. And I agree. I don't think that just teaching people how to be critical consumers of media messages changes anything. It certainly hasn't in the last half of a century to a century. And then the other idea of this is the empower people to effectively use media. So this again is the power in action. This is a traditional line of like, if we teach people how to use media, then they'll be better. I think both of these issues are quite problematic, and I can just tell you a little bit why. Protectionism says that media literacy is a defense against the most disturbing forms of sensationalism and propaganda pouring out of rapidly growing culture industries. So this is like the idea that we see this in the United States where I live, and also in Greece where my family comes from. You see very rampant populism in the media, very, very rampant messages that are harmful, that are xenophobic. We all see them everywhere. And on the one hand, we say if we just teach people to defend against this form of media, then we can overcome this harmful rhetoric. I think this is problematic on two ways. One is this assumes that we are simply robots that can effectively negotiate these spaces. It's really good for us to be able to understand and critique harmful messaging and inappropriate messaging, but on a very human level, I don't necessarily think it's possible for us to detach from messages that we side with and messages that we side against. So I think we do this anyway, and protecting people at a young age for sure is great, but as those of us who have children and young families understand that it's a little bit more complicated than just teaching people about Disney princesses and advertisements. There's actually another level to this. On the other side, empowerment, we need to be empowered to be part of the media conversation, to be creating, participating, and acting in the world. A lot of us in the audience, when I asked what does it mean to be media literate, said this, and I actually agree with the empowerment narrative, that we do need to teach people to be empowered to create. But I think if you teach this without any intentionality of the values associated with it, that you empower the people to be great citizens and inclusive, and you also empower people to be manipulative and to use media to adopt to their own ends. So with this empowerment narrative, if you don't tie it to a value system, then it simply just becomes more ways to empower more people to act in different ways. So I think protecting people and empowering people are important, but standing alone, both of them create problems that perpetuate some of the harmful media narratives that we see in the world today. So what I want to do is I want to ask one other quick question. I want to ask you one quick question, then we're going to kind of go through some of the implications of technology on media literacy, and then I'm going to put forth a model that I think we might want to address. So my second question here is, how is your thinking of media literacy impacted by digital technologies? How is media literacy, you say, what is it to be media literacy? Act, power, awareness, yeah. So I want to take a couple on saying, how is media literacy impacted by digital technologies? Yes?
Nowadays, media can take news from different sources, which are Google, Facebook even, blogs, Twitter, and large varieties of media. So in this way, she's impacted by technologies, I think.
So it's impacted in the fact that there are way more sources, there are more technologies, and we have far more options to choose from.
They can take news from these technologies and to distribute it to the people.
So what we've known traditionally, like we traditionally have been able to understand sources because we know where they come from, we know who they are, and now it's much harder for us to understand where messages come from, how they originate, who makes them. Right, so we have less awareness there. Yes?
I think digital technologies have been giving more voices to the people who are less literate in the basic sense of literacy, not media literate.
Okay.
So media literacy is impacted by that, and that it needs to adapt to be able to apply to those who cannot even read and write, but use mobile phones and use other sorts of digital technologies.
Okay, so there's a basic sense of access that comes with digital technologies to be part of media systems without having to have an advanced level of literacy or without having to pass a certain threshold. So we have more people accessing more technologies, and so there's a bigger need for media literacy to serve an even wider community. Yeah, sure, in the back. I'm sorry, do you want to? You can talk quickly and then we can go back.
I guess media literacy is impacted positively by digital technologies.
Okay.
Because now people can act more, so they can imply.
Sure, sure. I agree with that. I think the positive thing is something that I would like, I think I'll talk more about that tomorrow. I actually think that it's hard to argue one side or another. In as much as we've seen people come together positively to do things with technology, we've seen people to come together to do really potentially harmful things with technology. So this is, again, that value question, right? Yeah.
I think it can also impact it negatively because when you know the technologies, you can manipulate the news, manipulate photos. This happens in news and advertising.
Yep, so again, this is exactly right. The more open these platforms are and the more easy to use they are to create content, the less people need to know how to use technologies to participate. So it actually just opens up for potential positive, but also what we've seen a lot tomorrow with this idea of fake news and partisanship and hate speech and xenophobia. This has kind of been enabled by people who just have low barriers to access to technology. Yeah, go ahead.
بعتقد انها
Okay, thank you.
اكثر شيء اثرت فيه التكنولوجيا بالميديا ليترسي اللي هي صحافة المواطن، انه ناخذ الاخبار حتى من المواطنين، خاصة بالسوشيال ميديا، بالفيسبوك، تويتر، انستغرام. صار المواطن هو اساس رئيسي بالوصول للمعلومة او الحصول على معلومة خاصة في يعني الوصول للحدث في اسرع وقت ممكن.
Right, so there's a sense of immediacy associated with this, and that citizens are becoming more, almost quicker to things than storytellers, than these traditional legacy professional storytellers. Yes, let's do one more. You want to go? We haven't heard from. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I didn't know that they're passing the mic without me. Thank you for your helpful efficiency. Yes.
I think as the digital technologies are developing, so media literacy should change or should develop too. You need to change its or to develop its definitions, its tools, etc.
Sure, so they have to develop their definitions and how they approach this to respond to these technologies, which are developing but also are very sophisticated in some ways, yes.
Yeah, I think also adding to what you were saying about the citizen journalism, the digital, especially platforms now, all media, their target is to be trendy, to let anyone talk about, so they only want to get traffic, so it affects the how they present media and how they select the news they present.
Yep, so this is really important, and this is something I'll talk more about tomorrow and a little bit today. This idea that these new legacies of networks, and my colleague Moses Shumo will talk more about this, I think tomorrow, this new legacy of ownership, they have few intentions, and they aren't to kind of spread engagement, they aren't to increase diversity, they aren't to improve tolerance and inclusion in the world, they actually have the opposite principles, and we need to figure out how to navigate. So thank you for that. Do you want to do one more comment, and then we'll go on? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to the citizen journalism, because someone mentioned that. And I think in comparison to journalists, we have to bear in mind that these citizens who are now empowered to post news have their agendas, have their hidden agendas which they try to impose on the broader public. So further discussions are needed, I think, in this direction.
Okay, did you want to, okay, we'll go here and then you want to talk to? Okay, we can do these two and then we'll move on. Go ahead.
بعتقد انه التكنولوجيا تطور باعتقادي انه تطور التكنولوجي الكبير في ظل الحاله اللي بيعيشها الوطن العربي اللي حاله عدم الاتزان هاي سببت انه عدم الفصل او الحاجز اللي بين الصحفي والمواطن اختفت. هلا احنا بنحكي عن الدكتور جاد حكى من شوي عن انه الاعلام مجموعه من الافراد بيشتغلوا في مؤسسات اعلاميه بانتاج لمواد اعلاميه معينه، بس انا باعتقادي في الحاله اللي بنعيشها في ظل التطور التكنولوجي الكبير اللي بيصير وبنشوفه اصبح هناك جدليه بحد ذاتها، لانه المواطن بحد ذاته صار صحفي. فممكن انه التربيه الرقميه بتعمل على تنظيم التكنولوجيا لسه قبل تنظيم الافكار وتنظيم المواطنين او الافراد العاملين في الاعلام. تنظيم التكنولوجيا بحد ذاتها.
Right, and I think that's a very good point. This is a loose connection, so sometimes it was another one of these. Okay, so I actually think that's a very good point, and I think we call them citizen journalists. I don't know when that has helped us to kind of confuse what we think of as a journalist in the first place. So as any citizen with a cell phone who can simply tell a story, when we start calling them journalists, what does that mean for what journalists do, right? We have this term citizen journalists. So we don't call people citizen doctors, we don't call people citizen lawyers, but all of a sudden we call citizen journalists people who can tell stories. And a lot of times there's some again benefit and problematic. So we'll do one more. Thank you. We'll do one more comment, and then we'll go.
It's open? Okay. So I think since we are consumer for the media and we're like in chaos, using the social media apps and the technology, we're not ready for this technology. And then people now are in chaos using different applications, different websites. If I want to talk about the media, now it's in different stage. Meaning, if the traditional media was on paper or newspaper, now it's on the website. And that's why we need the media literacy, maybe to find a methodology or a specific way to order all of these things around.
That we need it. It's more of a necessity now than maybe ever before, because we are engaging with information and knowledge and ideas at a faster pace than ever before. We're creating more, we're writing more, we're sharing more than we have ever before, and we're trying to find ways to navigate that landscape. And I think media literacy, my argument tomorrow and today is saying that those traditional frameworks that were created in 1982 in Grunwald and 1992, those are really great, but I actually think they're very problematic for the ways in which we need to respond today. They assume that we are that we are distanced from the media. They assume that we are all agnostic, critical thinkers of the media. They assume that we don't bring our own values. And as someone who lives in the United States who studies this for a living, I'm the first one when I see something in the media to start yelling to my wife, blah, 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 and it doesn't matter what it is. If I agree with it, I don't care where it comes from. I just yell about it. So you might argue that I'm part of this problem too if we take the traditional approach to media literacy that we always had. So let me go on to try to put a framework on this. I want us to understand some of these specific technologies. Again, thinking about the next 2 weeks and providing you with a framework for this. Connective technologies challenge our definitions of media literacy. So these technologies challenge our definition because they are embedded by the use of us. They are not embedded by other people that create for us. They exist by our use. So all of a sudden, we invert the traditional approaches to media literacy. When we say citizen journalist, what does that mean here? When we say filmmaker or storyteller, what does that mean in the context of this? There's a new legacy of networks that exist here. Clive Thompson wrote a great book, which I can't remember the name of, excuse me. I don't remember. And he said in it, at their best, today's digital tools help us see more, retain more, communicate more. At worst, they leave us prey to the manipulation of the tool makers. I know what it's called. It's called Smarter Than You Think. Okay. So I am going to ask us, so I'm going to put this here as our prompt for the challenge of media literacy. And I think what you guys have said, complicated, makes sense. I think there are, in a past book I wrote, I had this graph together which said, what's complicating media literacy is that at one point, it was very clear who was creating media and who was consuming media. And this has been kind of complicated for some years. There was a very clear, it's what Clay Shirky calls transaction costs. It was not easy to create media. It was not easy to produce good media. Even at the beginning of some of these legacy social networks, you still needed to know how to work media to create things. What I started noticing in research was that there was a complete collapse in us understanding who was creating and who was consuming. And in fact, the word consumer became very problematic because a consumer is someone who passively digests things. And that, to me, we should be careful about saying consuming media when it simply means we are passively ingesting media of sorts. So what I notice here is there is a breakdown in understanding the role of the media, or not the media, or how media messages are produced, and where citizens are in that picture. Before there was a clear distinction, and now that distinction has broken down. And there are 3 things that I attribute to this: mobility, connectivity, and spreadability. I'm going to go through these 3 so we can kind of complicate them a little bit. And then we'll get into the media literacy attributes. So what are the impacts of mobile technologies on our media use? We'll put that question there. We don't need to, I don't think we need to get to it now, but let's think about that as we move forward here. What are the impacts of mobile technologies on our media use? So first, we actually have an inversion of the way that we use media. So if you look at these legacy media have collapsed into mobile spaces. So we no longer organize our lives around media, but we organize media around our lives. And that organization is very fluid. It's very integrated into everything we do. We no longer stop to do media. We still do sometimes, but rarely, unless it's entertainment, are we stopping to do media-related activities. Normally, they just integrate fluidly into our lives. And so these things, if you don't know what that is, we can talk about that later. It's a cell phone. It's one of those phones that's very smart, and it actually just places all of this in here. When we were on the plane flying here, for those of you who already know this, most airlines are now just saying download an app on your phone and use that to consume media and whatever else you want to. You can connect through us. So we've actually inverted the way that we think about media. So at this structure, mobile technologies have really disrupted us. They've become so ubiquitous. We don't know when we're really places and when we aren't. So this is from a premiere of a movie in London. And you can really see what's happening here is that everybody wants the moment, except for one person. and I consider her now a trendsetter. Instead of being an old person, she seems to me like she's going to be the future of what does it mean to be engaged. She's the one person that's not trying to capture the moment in perpetuity. She's the one person simply trying to engage in the real moment in itself. Another way to show this, these are two different events that happened at the Vatican in Rome at two different times, and they were for two different reasons. One is, of course, one was the death of a pope and one was the inauguration. But the stark contrast in how these are documented, it makes me think that up here in the corner, we have a really early adopter who's trying to capture this on a flip phone behind 100 heads. So that person was clearly ahead of the curve. But on this picture, you see what's happening. This kind of, this ubiquity, this attachment to the phones. So what are people doing in Rome? Why do they want to be there? They want to be there to experience it. They want to be there to crystallize it. But there's also something that's so encompassing by their technology. Someone even brings a tablet here, which is amazing, to try to record this as best as she could. So this is really fascinating. So we see a complete integration. In Salzburg, these past 3 weeks, we talked a lot about the young people in our program, and they no longer have a dependence on mobile technologies. If the mobile technology is around, it's almost impossible for them not to check in with it. And you no longer blame them for it, but you understand that they've grown up with it. Phones are great because you can always be heard, you can control attention, and you can never be alone. Right? This is what phones afford us. They afford the idea that we always have a place in the world and that we are always with others. We're never alone because we can always be connected. And at the very start, that's what the technologies do above else. We've done multi-year studies on this with young people from around the world, and continually we see that of the abundance of apps and the abundance of tools, for the most part, everybody is simply trying to connect with other people. That is all they're doing. And most of the times it's peers. They're just trying to connect. You can always be heard. You get to control the attention. And you can never be alone in the world. That's great. So one of the downfalls of this is this idea of a tethered generation. So in our study that we did a few years ago around this, we found that the phone was so ubiquitous that about a third of our study slept with the phone next to them, and not just on their nightstand, but literally like on them. The phone would be like on their pillow or on their face or somewhere on their bodies. It's amazing, and how much they needed it. They felt anxious when their phone was with them and they could not use it. And again, these are just they're just tethered, right? And there's a great scholar who talks about this. Her name's Sherry Turkle, and she wrote a book, quite controversial. She's more of a protectionist if you go back to that media literacy, where she said the growing dependence on mobile phones is an act of self-establishment, where people through their mobile devices turn other persons into self-objects to shore up their fragile sense of self. And so here we can see this simply by, this is one video, it's meant to be comedic, but it actually calls out the behavior that we perform with our cell phones and social networks versus the behavior that we perform in human life. And this is one of the impacts where we start to indistinguish that divide. So this video, I'll play it quickly. It's only a minute long. I'll try to play it on the computer to see if it works. It distinguishes, again, it's meant to take Facebook posts and put them into real life. And the goal is to distinguish like the things we do online versus the way we act in real life. So let's see if this works.
I just went from being single to it's complicated.
So my senior year, Alfonso Cuarón did not disappoint.
I don't know who you're talking to, but you're both a couple stupid idiots. Gravity sucked. Blue hoodie, liked. Flower, liked. Pigeon, liked. Look at my dog. Look at my dog. Look at my dog. I really like your style.
I think I'll follow you. Drinking orange juice and loving life. I feel #blessed. Guys, I'm sad. I can't wait to go to Sydney's.
Sorry. Okay, so it's funny. It's funny because we're all kind of part of the joke. We understand the differences, but that these mobile phones allow us to frame our attention, to frame who we are and the way we express ourselves. And I would argue that a media literate person would say, we need to control the way we use phones and know when to turn them off and be present. But I increasingly think that's not part of the problem at all. Like, we all do this, even everyone back there. We all like to do this because we want to express and be with each other. So the problem might be learning how to be alone more, but I don't know if the problem is with the tool itself or the problem is with how we approach these tools. So that's mobility. So this is the first problem. We are continuing to have these devices that express to us continuously. Do you have a question? Okay, we have one. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is, what do you do when the public sphere becomes online? So by public sphere, I mean the Habermasian definition of the public sphere. You talked about the networked public sphere, but we talking about how the citizen himself, or the citizens in a society converse together in order to work towards solutions in society.
Right, so it's a great question. So what happens when we go into the digital public sphere? I think some people would argue, is there a public sphere in digital spaces? Does that exist? And what does that look like? I think there are great, I think tomorrow I will be talking about that extensively. So how can you think about caring and agency and engagement online after we get through some of this? So I'm not avoiding that, but I think I can get to some of those answers. And the quick answer is, I'll say the problem with media literacy is it has removed any sort of kind of human. It's removed the human aspect of the public sphere. It removes negotiation in real time. It removes notions of caring. It removes notion of agency, because the technologies in the digital public sphere are designed to do nothing to create a public sphere. In Habermasian sense of this coffee shop where you could go in and have interactions, when you go into any network, the design is for it to be contested space, for it to be partisan space, for it to be polarized, for it to continue for you to express things that are loud and vitriolic. And this is intentional in the way that algorithms design it. So digital public spheres, depending on these spaces, I think, in the end, my argument is like, these spaces are designed for anything but a public sphere, and that's the first step to recreating some sorts of online kind of civic space. Yeah, did you want to add something? Okay, sure, go ahead. I have 3 more hours now, I think, so we're okay.
Great.
Is that right, Jet? 3 minutes, okay, yeah.
So I wanted to add, because we already mentioned the public sphere, I think that because nowadays we're able to connect with each other, our private sphere is brutally abused. We don't have it anymore.
Sure.
And I think that if we want to use media adequately and effectively, we have to have the right to have this private sphere, to take back, to think about the media, to think about the messages we receive. And if we don't have this ability, then maybe we don't use the media the same way we used to use it, and maybe we don't use it effectively anymore.
Right, so this is really great, I like that. My colleague Moses in the back is giving a keynote lecture on Wednesday all about privacy, and he is going to talk about this. I would say us taking our privacy back is great, because once we opt into these networks, again, we have to think about the intentionality of networks. You don't take, there's a quote that I hope Moses uses that says, every time you don't pay for something, you are the product. And so every time you don't pay for anything, you become the product. So we shouldn't assume that, that we're going to go into these networks that are technology companies that are commodified spaces, and then assume that we have right to privacy. There's clear stipulations. But I do think that's a great conversation. I'll talk about it a little bit, and then on Wednesday, Moses is going to be talking about that for an entire 90 minutes. So thank you. So let's go on to this connecting. How has our ability to connect with each other affected our media use? So connectivity we have mobility as the first pressure that's disintegrated the space. And then connectivity. Clay Shirky, who's a very popular public thinker, says that the logic of digital media has allowed people formerly known as the audience to create value for one another. He's kind of this techno-optimist. And he wrote this at a very emerging time of media systems. He calls this former audiences, that we are no longer audiences because we're the ones creating value. And I think at a certain time there was more optimism towards that value. But as these networks have become more and more legacy-oriented and interested in data and commodified, it's very hard, it just becomes more hard to see that value. It exists, but it becomes harder. We see that our world is connected somewhat, even this fallacy of connectivity. We should not assume that we live in a connected world. We should assume that the networks that prioritize connectivity as a market function will connect others in that space. So you still see a lot of the world is quite dark, where there's not a clear need or aim to get there. So we do have more technologies that demands a larger sense of literacy, but we still have places that are quite dark. Facebook pretty much maps this connectivity grid. So this shows you where our internet connections are most, and then if you look at like where Facebook is most present, it's most present in those spaces. I'll show you how much we connect quickly. This is something that Moses tried to steal from me and I stole back from him. This is just to show you the ubiquity of how we connect. In 1 second on the internet, here's what we see. So you see this number? Since opening this page, here's how many tweets were sent. This is all the tweets that are sent in 1 second. Instagram photos uploaded in 1 second. Oop. We can go back. Sorry. Tweets in 1 second. Instagram photos in 1 second. Oop. Tumblr posts. These are Skype calls every second. How many gigabytes of internet traffic exist in 1 second? This goes on for a while. You see how connected we are in the world. This will end at some point soon. I'm just going to go down. This is Google searches in 1 second. And since we opened this pages, how many more Google searches that have been? Here's YouTube videos viewed in 1 second. Oh, this is 1 second. This is not 1 minute. This is not one country. That's 1 second. And this is emails. This will take the rest of my lecture, so I'll thank you in advance. This is how many emails are sent every second. It's amazing. There's been this many million since we, since I opened this browser a little bit ago. I don't know where it's going now. I'm going to go down again. You guys get the picture, right? I don't think it ever ends, and it makes me sick and dizzy. Okay, so this is simply how connected we are from tools that create connectivity. So connectivity, connective culture is inundated by coding. These are not technology. We always say that like we have the power to shape. So every second there's like 70 hours of YouTube content uploaded by over 30 billion users in the world uploading YouTube content. We have the ability to create YouTube content. We have less of a chance of getting things seen by YouTube than we do getting struck by lightning. And that's simply a reality now. So we have to reframe what getting seen means and what having impact through a video format gets seen. 70 hours a minute of content is uploaded. Coding dictates most of what gets seen. It's not simply randomness anymore. There are very high-tech algorithms. Connective culture derives from a pressure from peers and technologies to expand through competition and gain power through alliances. So one thing I'll talk about tomorrow is like these technologies are no longer open, they're no longer diversified, and they're no longer across. And then lastly, connective culture evolves by a resetting of boundaries between private, corporate, and public domains. So we are connected, but we need to question, when we think about media literacy and we have the power to act, what does it mean to act within spaces that are increasingly commodified, spaces that are increasingly polarized, and simply designing for you to give them more data? What does that mean to act when we are this connected? And it's ubiquitous. We need to really interrogate that. And the last thing here is our ability to share information. And this is where spreadability comes into place. So we're not only always with technologies, and we're not always only connecting with each other, but we are doing it to spread information. We are simply not consuming. A lot of studies show that what we do more on social networks is repurpose and appropriate content than simply consume content. We consume less and less, and we appropriate and we share more and more. So audiences are making their presence felt by actively shaping media flows, and media makers are waking up to the need to actively listen and respond to them. So again, this comes from Henry Jenkins' work, where he's talking about spreadability. Spreadability? Yes. Do you have a microphone? I think they need it in case of translation and things. Thank you.
I just want to comment or perhaps formulate this into a question.
Sure.
Sometimes this connective culture brings the opposite results, because people have this virtual sense of being connected or helping or acting when they share a post about a cause, thinking like they've done what they need to do because they've just shared it, while nothing actually gets done with the cause. Or nothing is tangible is done with it. Like, share this 100 times and so will happen in Africa, or for instance, and nothing gets to Africa. It's all virtual and nothing happens there.
So it's a good question. The idea that, what you're talking about is a very good question. It's something we call the agency gap. And the agency gap is articulated this. And I won't say this continuous, but the agency gap is what these networks have done is created an amazing amount of capacity to show concern, but very little capacity to act. So there's a clear gap that emerges between showing concern and having the capacity to act. So we're very good at showing concern. We're very good at sharing things that we care about politically, sharing things about our rights, making it known, and these tools are very good into putting them with other people who share our values. But because we're so good at sharing concern, we've kind of forgotten what it means to have a capacity to act. And these tools often get in the way of that. So I'll talk about that more tomorrow, but that's a very good point. And not to say, I'm being critical to kind of challenge some of these assumptions that we have. I think these technologies, I'll show you tomorrow through a series of case studies, have vast potential still to bring people meaningfully together. But we just have to reinterrogate some of our basic assumptions about what does it mean to share and to connect and why we do that. So that's my goal today, is to do that. But I think there is a lot of potentials for, I don't know if I want to call this the public sphere, but for meaningful engagement in digital spaces, for finding ways to act that are purposeful and impactful, and that we can do this in a digital culture. We just need to step back from the way that we've been thinking about it so much and try to reimagine what that's like. So that's my goal here. So, okay, so sticky and spreadable content, as you know, the internet is designed for the right column here. It's not designed to have a bunch of individuals go to one space. It's not designed for one set of centralized material or any one unified experience. It's not designed for pre-structured interactivity. It's designed for a flow of ideas, dispersed material, diversified experience, open-ended participation, motivating and facilitating sharing. That's what we designed for. And this phenomenon of spreadability, there's a great book called Spreadable Media on this, which is actually talking all about how this happens online and how it gets perpetuated by audiences and communities of interest. This is one example of a spreadable technique. Do you guys remember, did this happen here? Okay, I don't know what this means. Meg told me this was a good example. It's a dress, and I think there was a debate on the color of the dress, right? Did we ever come to an answer? See, why is it still happening? I just heard 3 no's and 3 yeses. I don't see anything. I just see a dress. I don't think it's a very pretty dress. No offense to anyone who likes it. But I don't see it. Is there anything? All right, anyway, this is an example of spreadability. Does anyone remember this example? Right, so this is a great This is in the Spreadable Media book, this is where media companies started to design for spreadability. So this is a video, very emotional. I don't want to play it now because we might all cry together. But it's a video where they really designed, they designed the elements of what makes people want to spread information. And they did it very well. It was one of the first examples of an event that was spread quite widely by panning into audiences, by finding a way to design content that felt like it was native, that felt like it was by people, for people, that had elements of laughter and joy, and paint that classic movie arc of building up a character and making them come through a difficult challenge and surprise and end with beauty and love. So she really was, we can play it after if we're ever feeling sad and we want to have a time to smile, but for now we'll move on. Okay, so in the last part of this talk, I'm going to go over a framework that's going to answer this question. So we have articulated, like, we understand the human aspects of media literacy. We've seen pressures by technology to think about connectivity and engagement. And we've looked at mobility, connectivity, and spreadability as three things that are blurring the lines. So if we go back to media literacy, and we go back to those definitions of access and action and evaluation, now we can start to look at them of, let's go back and think about what these terms mean when they're embedded in a culture that's increasingly disruptive in increasingly more parts of the world. So my question is, how do we approach media literacy in a way that embraces digital culture to both protect and empower? So we are still integrated in both of these in the end of the day, but we're not interested in them as either or. We're interested in them and how they sit in digital culture and what that means. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do, and I have there are 5 different components, and each one has some examples that I'll share with you, and we'll watch, and I'll ask you to respond to. Okay, and then we'll have lunch. So these come out of a book that I wrote 2 years ago about emerging citizenship. So really kind of, again, this idea of interrogating frameworks explores the relationship between how we learn to critique and create media and how we use these skills to engage in digital culture. So I was trying to really, there was an argument that I always saw in media literacy work that said, if you teach people how to better critique media and even create media, then you'll have a better society. Then you'll have more inclusive and engaged citizens. And I started doing research, and I realized quite quickly that if you teach people how to be more critical towards the media and even create media, you do 2 things. You bred more cynicism towards media systems and less trust towards them, and then you breed more people that are less willing to engage because they simply know how to spot out what's wrong, what doesn't work, how media messages are made to persuade and to manipulate, and they don't have any way to kind of to meaningfully respond. So in our research, we said, oh, great, we're teaching people how to deconstruct news and advertisements and political speeches, and then they find out that everyone is trying to manipulate, and then they just say, all right, everyone's manipulating, so it's over. And maybe what I can do is go on Facebook and write a post, which went into the Facebook algorithm, and then when with other people writing Facebook posts, then everybody was all upset and cynical and disengaged. So I kind of started saying, well, what's the way to respond to this? If everybody is like this, how can we respond? And I don't think I did the right thing, but I'm going to talk you through what I tried to articulate in this book. So I tried to, and why I don't think this is right, I'll tell you tomorrow. But for now, you can just pretend to think this is right. I put together a framework for thinking about media literacies as specifically connecting, like a life cycle approach to media literacy that connects critique and creation and embeds it in like meaningful engagement. So you start from one proposition, you work down, but that it was meant to provide this life cycle approach to media literacy, starting with what we all start with, access as a human right, then moving through value systems and critical creation and situating it in communities, and then finding out ways to act. So that this model was embedded in this life cycle approach, that we could at least start to think about how we use and teach and engage with media in a way that both allows us to be critical and creative engagement, but also situates us in some value space, which is what like appreciation means. Not to simply make us those detached humans, but for us to think about actions embedded in a set of connections to civic society. And so I'm going to take you through these series of stories and examples just to kind of share with you what I'm talking, and hopefully this can set some foundations for what we start to engage with in the next days. So the first thing is access. Access is a fairly simple construct. I'm going to tell you a quick story about access, then I'm going to talk a little bit more with some of my colleagues that we'll talk to you about. So my access story, we all think about, when we think about access to media, we think about having access. We think about it as a human right. If you don't have access to media, you can't participate in anything. It's a basic right. If you don't have access, it's very hard for you to participate, right? But access can be more tricky. In this age of digital technology, we don't just need access to platforms and algorithms and systems. So I'm going to tell you a story about in 2013, 2013, just after my second daughter was born, I was in Salzburg with Jad, and I was flying to, there's Salzburg, and we were flying to Beirut to give, that was the first MDLAB or the second MDLAB? 2013, the first MD, oh wow, now we feel old and emotional at the same time. And we were flying, and the night before we were flying, there was I was flying on Turkish Airlines, and the night before we were flying, there was news that a Turkish airline pilot had been kidnapped in Beirut. Does anyone remember this? Maybe not, because this, right, okay, so I don't know the story, but so we were sitting around a table in Salzburg, and this comes through, and Jad shows me his phone. He goes, "Oh look, there was a pilot kidnapped in Turkey." It was a time when the war was elevated, when there was conflict in the region. There still is, but when it was quite animated still and elevated. And so in the United States, the media picked this up completely, and they started connecting the Turkish airline pilot kidnapped to like bigger wars in the region. And they started saying, so Jad was telling me like, oh, this is okay, it's just a local group that's on the border that doesn't acknowledge the borders. I don't remember the exacts of the story, but he couched it in more of a local frame. In the US, all the major outlets, you see, this is a Google screenshot. I had my wife called me and said, oh, you're on the next plane to Beirut on Turkish Airlines, and they just kidnapped a pilot. And I have a 1-month-old baby here, and you're the father, and you're still going to go. And then Jad was like, it's okay, you don't have to go, but this is not a big deal. And her reality was this. So I asked her to take a screenshot of her Google search when this happened, and this is what she found, okay? And then I decided to come because I might care for Jad sometimes more than my family, and I need to support him. So then we flew to Lebanon, and we did this, and then when we were doing this, we were asking ourselves that we took our computers, so Jad, who's from here and grown up here, and me, and we did the searches for Beirut, Lebanon, through my IP connected to home where Jad was. And when I searched Beirut, this is what I got. Looks pretty familiar, right? And this is actually through my wife. So this is what we got with an image search. When Jad searched Beirut, Lebanon, the same time, this is what he got. So my wife's computer in Boston and Jad's computer here. So when we think about access, and we think about media literacy, and we think about criticality, we should think more about the impact not only of us having universal access, but how it shapes our reality. Some of you might know this as filter bubble. This might be something you've learned before, but filter bubbles are kind of the personalization of of everything we search and how it's reproduced to come back to us. So we all have, our computers and systems are increasingly personalized by us. This is a short video to talk about how social media filter bubbles work. This is from the United States context, so
it's human nature.
It will be about
we surround
US
ourselves
politics.
with people we agree with. And the internet has only made it easier. For many, Twitter is a place to have existing views reinforced. Often without realizing it, a lot of us choose to live in an echo chamber, a place where it can seem like everyone on Earth is just like us. And Facebook? Well, Facebook takes it even further. Of course you can hide those posts from your goofy aunt, but Facebook actually does a lot of that work for you, behind the scenes. It knows what you like and what you comment on, what brands you follow, what ads grab your attention, events you're attending, and publications you read. Facebook uses all that data to feed its algorithms, and those algorithms choose what you see. And if you know where to look, you can actually see what Facebook thinks you like, your interests, your hobbies, and even your political views. The result is what's become known as the filter bubble, where your timeline is filled with opinions you share. Facebook actually makes money off knowing those things. They sell you and your filtered bubble to advertisers. Those advertisers will pay more to get their products in front of people that are likely to buy them. And if you're seeing things you like, you'll spend more time on Facebook, seeing more ads, and making the company more money. But does the bubble keep us well informed? It's a tough question to answer, especially while the technology is still changing so fast. But one thing's for sure, that technology has the power to make us more connected or more isolated than ever.
Okay, so that's a concept that I think we'll talk about a little bit more. But as we interrogate access to information, we need to interrogate what context access is, how we're connected, how that's being personalized for us. Not only is it a human right that we're accessed, but we also are being very specifically, we are being couched very specifically in how we access information, how that gets reproduced. Again, this is something that you'll hear more about Wednesday, but we also have to think about what privacy means on the internet and the state that, like, can you get your privacy bought back in? I'm really compelled by the idea that anytime you get something for free, you are the product. So what happens on the internet with privacy? At Target, which is a big consumer store in the United States, most will be talking about this again, everyone who swipes their credit card gets an ID, and this ID tracks everything they do. More and more people are learning how to track even our daughters on mobile phones. This is something we were talking about before. Hackers even hacked into a crock pot that you can set by your mobile phone, and they get into your phone and your home that way to track your data and take it. So it's not limited to any one thing. So when we think about access and privacy and ownership, just one thing to keep on the table: how do we interrogate that in digital culture? What are the technologies that give us privacy concerns now but will be commonplace in 10 years? What are those? These are things you'll be thinking about more, but we should start thinking about this. Give us privacy concerns now, but will be commonplace in 10 years. Okay. The next part of this, so we have access, that's complicated, then we have awareness. And awareness, in this scheme of what I was talking about, was like value systems of like, what are the values and the frameworks that we place when we enter into these technologies? So people grapple with managing their identity under the spotlight of an ecosystem designed to publicize every teen fad, moral panic, and new hyped technology. So that's what these are designed. So how are we aware? We had one person early on who said like, we need to be more aware. A lot of times that awareness is in contrast with our need to be continually engaged and manage our identity. And this is from a theory that's just embraced called the unraveling theory. The unraveling theory has been developed over the last 10 years, and it says that once enough people reveal their information, then not revealing your information becomes a stigma, even for those with less than ideal characteristics. So this idea that we've all unraveled, so we've actually got to the point where it's harder to be not engaged in these spaces than it is on. And so we need to think about awareness of the value systems and the ideologies that we bring to these, right? And so I'll show you one video. Again, this is kind of a little bit of a funnier one, but when I think about awareness, I think about how we understand and approach relationships and values online versus how we do in real life. So, so this is a little bit of it's a little comic, but it just kind of goes through one person's really bad day on the internet.
Way beyond confidence. Some of you think it's
So the idea here is, when they ask you what's on your mind, and we think about how we're aware of what's being said online, what the intentionality is actually, it's a self-filtering process by ourselves and our own positions. When you lose that human interaction, awareness becomes, being aware of where media comes from and what the intention is becomes a little bit more complicated than just knowing who wrote it and how it was staged. So the result of this sometimes is of always being situated within the virtual and the real, is the notion of being silenced by our technology, something that Nicholas Carr writes about in The Shallows, where he says, these lead to a crisis of empathy that diminish us at home, at work, and in public life. And in fact, a lot of the partisanship and populist narratives that have been emerging lately, researchers are now trying to connect to a crisis of empathy because these technologies, they become so much about facilitating this real-life engagement, but that real-life engagement is simply self-manicured, and it's more posturing, and it sometimes is genuine, of course, but it's needing to be connected. Again, that idea about being connected all the time, and that's important. And sometimes there's challenges with that. One study showed a 40% decline in markers for empathy in young college students because they were trying to preserve their time in self-preservation and using these networks to find a sense of value. And so in one large-scale study in the United States, their level to be empathetic, like with one another, was being challenged by that. Okay, so we have access awareness. Assessment, I'm going to ask you guys to do an exercise. I'm going to show you a 3-minute video. So assessment in media literacy means we know how to deconstruct, right? It means we can critique the message, who sent it, where's it from, what's the purpose, who's the audience, what's omitted from the message, what's included. I want you to take your Media Literacy 101 hats, and we're going to deconstruct one video called Do What You Can't, okay? And I want you to try to deconstruct, what is this for? Who's the audience? Who made it? What's the intention? What's the purpose? What's omitted? Okay, we'll have those questions after, but just try to do a good critical deconstruction of this piece, and we'll get to the, and we'll try to figure out in this complicated digital terrain, what does it mean to assess content, okay? And I know you guys, this is a very smart group, so we'll hope we can come up with the right answers here, okay? I think this is 3 minutes, and it's a YouTube clip, and it's called Do What You Can. I won't say anything more about it. Oops, sorry. Try to get this, okay. Okay, look closely at it as it goes.
To the haters, the doubters, my 7th grade vice principal, to everyone who's ever told anyone with a dream they can't, this video's for you. Keep your head down, follow the rules, do as you're told, play it safe, wait your turn, ask permission, learn to compromise. This is terrible advice. If I were to write an autobiography, a book about my life, one title that would work would be Do What You Can't, because that idea encapsulates everything I've ever done. Like when I wanted to move to New York City and my dad was like, you can't, you don't have any money. Or when I first said I wanted to make movies and it was, you can't, you didn't go to film school. I want to have a TV show, you can't, Casey, you're not pretty enough. And to go even further, like if I were to characterize what this new generation of content creators and filmmakers, what we all do on YouTube and everywhere else is, we do what we can't. You can't be an action movie filmmaker, but you get your parkour friends to dress up like video game characters, jump off some buildings, and you can. Right, Devin? Yes. You can't have a talk show, but you have a webcam and you can. What's up, you beautiful bastard?
This is my first YouTube video ever.
Next thing you know, you're interviewing the president.
I heard that you're going to be out of a job soon.
Maybe I'll start a YouTube show.
That's what I'm thinking.
You can't fly around New York City on a magic carpet, but get your electric skateboard, some PVC pipe, a great outfit, give Jesse a call, and you can. What are you doing?
This is so dope.
You don't need gear, you don't need trucks or a crane, you don't need some big expensive camera rig that never works. When you're a creator, you don't need someone in your ear telling you what you can and can't do.
I'm not in the subway!
what you can and can't say.
I accidentally did the shocker. Oh my god.
They call us gamers, influencers, internet famous.
What the fuck does that mean?
But we know something they don't. You can start a blog or a makeup channel. We'll travel around the world with a gigantic piano playing in beautiful places for interested people. When you're a creator, all you need is your phone, an internet connection, and a good idea. A story you want to share, something you need to say.
Confidence is within yourself.
And then the rest is history. If you do it right, you get to quit the day job. Make friends from places you've never been. Meetups, collaborations.
It's just two boys and two video cameras.
A life moving so fast and so full, you won't even have time to process it. So to my fellow creators, I say, keep creating, keep doing the work.
Hey guys!
And never forget, you don't have to listen to anyone, because in this new world, no one knows anything.
Hi, haters!
The haters, the doubters are all drinking champagne in the top deck of the Titanic, and we are the fucking iceberg. Do what you can't.
Okay. Do what you can't. That sounds pretty awesome. Who made that? Yes. Okay, Samsung, how do we know they made it? Okay, so did anyone else see that? Okay, a couple people. Samsung had they had a place. Do you remember when the placement was?
Right after he said you need a mobile phone, an ID, and Wi-Fi connection.
Okay, you need a mobile phone, an ID, and a Wi-Fi connection, and you picked up that it was a Samsung phone, and so then we assume that Samsung is the
Just I guess, yeah.
Okay, is it easy to pick that up? No. Right. Okay. Anyone else think? So Samsung paid for it. Anyone else? Yes. HBO.
You can actually see the Samsung logo several times in the video.
Yep.
But I don't think it's only Samsung. I think there are more than an entity involved in this. YouTube could be one of them as well.
Right. So it's great. So Samsung is the only brand that paid for this, and there was another advertiser, which was YouTube, but not.
I think HBO as well, because we see the logo there somewhere. I would also guess there is a sports company involved in this somehow?
I don't think any sports. I mean, there might be more sponsors that just sponsor his content. Yeah, go ahead.
I think I know this YouTuber a little bit.
Yeah.
And he started with his own camera, small camera, and after that, but I still watch his videos.
Yep.
And I know a Tunisian teenager is a very big fan of him.
Yep.
And he is really a fan, and he tried to do the same videos. The problem that this guy said that it's you can do what you want. It's just a little money to do great videos, but it's not true. So
right.
This is a problem.
Yeah, it's impossible to do that with a camera and a mobile phone, but maybe, yeah.
I think also I saw him wearing a cap at the very beginning of CNN logo, and I think he signed a deal with them, although I don't really get.
Right, so, okay, good. So you guys are doing amazing media literacy work. This is awesome. I love it. There's a lot of deconstruction here happening. So we know it was made by Samsung. It's an ad for YouTube Red. It's an ad for Casey Neistat that he's paid for. There might be sports companies, CNN might be out. This is great. This is really awesome deconstruction because we're in an auditorium and I asked you to deconstruct it. Most people see this on YouTube and they just get really empowered to do what? Do what they can, that's right, yeah. Like go jump off a building or throw something at somebody or get hit by a car or drink a lot of Coke with Mentos in your mouth. They can do anything that they shouldn't do. But that we've actually, the deconstruction of this is much more complicated and serious as an advertisement than we've had before. So we're asking ourselves to be much more complex in an age when we don't spend much time at all reflecting on things like this. Yes?
I wanted to add something. I think that such a motto is actually very good to motivate us, to empower us to challenge our limits. But at the same time, I think that while after watching such a video, you think that if you do something that you can't, you're gonna get, I don't know, a big prize, more attention, more self-esteem. Right. But what if you don't get that, just because you cannot record it in such a proper and good way? Yeah. So I think that at the end of the day, one could be very upset when we see only 3 likes just because we did something that we can't.
Exactly. That's very, yeah.
2 days ago, I've read an article, or actually a status for someone on Facebook, who was talking about the influencers in the Arab world, the fashionista or fashion bloggers, etc. They do many things, but as Arabs, we don't do these. And they are paid for to do this. So.
Right. I mean, it's simply, yeah, go ahead. Yes, I agree with that. Yeah, go ahead. You can have one more, then we'll move on.
Adding to who did that, I saw at the beginning of the video a big like that reminded me of Facebook, so maybe Facebook is involved in the whole thing as well.
Right.
And adding to what my colleague said, I guess the video is imposing certain ideas. It's not about doing what you can't. It's about doing what you can't see, what you can, but it's about what you see in the video. It's imposing certain ideas. So you see, like you have a piano in the desert. Okay, I'll go do so, because you saw that and you think, oh, I can't do that, so I'll do it. So it's imposing certain ideas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very smart. So this is a. Did you want to add in the back? This is a great. It's just another level of sophistication in the integration of. You can bring the mic to her. She wants to add. In the sophistication of content and the blurring of lines of what is civic, of what is professional, of what is produced, of what does it mean. Like this scales down into the belly of the internet. YouTube is an entirely commodified space. It's impossible, it's less likely than anywhere else that people will get seen making YouTube videos. So this do what you can't is like tongue in cheek. It's YouTube Red. Make more stuff for YouTube, make more stuff for YouTube. And Samsung is the phone you should use, and just keep making stuff, even though it's impossible that you'll get seen. I'm just being critical for the sake of being critical. People can get seen, there's great examples of impactful work. It doesn't mean you shouldn't keep producing as the act, but if we're producing to get seen, we just need to re-establish what that means. In a space when YouTube's entirely commodified, when it's profitable for anybody. To be profitable on YouTube is to be commodified. It's to be sponsored. Right, exactly right. Yep, and to be in conflict with traditions, cultural traditions, political traditions. Yeah.
To maybe stay also in this idea of deconstruction. I mean, when we look at the guy that is speaking at the beginning, it's a white guy, obviously based in the United States, and he's touching upon this class issue. Yani, I didn't have money. Yeah. But what he's also the message that he's also conveying is that, with the help of social media, by sharing your data, you can achieve the American dream from coming from the down class and going up. Yeah. So this is repeating history or repeating a message that we know very well.
Right. Jad and I are making a video about how you can end up on the stage of MDLAB if you do what you can't. This is going to be our attempt. 5 minutes, yeah, I got you. Okay, so I'm just going to go quickly. So this actually seeps into, this is a music band, same thing happens. Like the commodification of culture drips into our art. So assessing media is not simply those questions of who is it for. It is like that, but what I'm saying is we can do that here in an auditorium. In YouTube, commercials are not, this is kind of native content or content marketing where it's just embedded into the culture. That message is awesome. I watch that. I'm a media literacy scholar, and at the end I'm like, I'm going to buy my daughter a camera and tell her to go break something and record it, because I want her to be great. Because it's not simply about advertising something. It's about motivating people to do things that are great. It's just much more complicated. This is a band OK Go from the United States, who is also, they have like invented the future of commodified music making by using labels to kind of further embed their type of music. I'll talk about this tomorrow. This is about fake news. We don't need to get there now. The last two quickly, appreciation. In appreciation, I want us to kind of think about when citizens can be impactful and have a voice. One example of this is from now, 6 or 7 years ago, the BP oil spill, the British petroleum oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in the United States, when BP changed their logo from a shield to a pretty flower in this attempt to greenwash the issue. But then a few organizations put out a call to respond, and people started to remix the BP logo into what they wanted it to be. So instead of them going from a shield to a pretty flower after they were responsible for a big oil spill, citizens started to take their logo and do what they wanted. And they did it with enough, they did it with, enough of an aesthetic and enough of a design that there are times when you can appreciate the vibrant culture that embeds itself in the internet. So you can see how this scaled. And then the response it has. The internet is really good for kind of really inclusive responses to issues that matter. In the earthquake in Haiti, more money was raised through social networks than anywhere else. So we understand that that happens. And appreciation should be part of this life cycle approach to media literacy. And then lastly is action. I won't show this. People act a lot of times, and we need to connect acts to values. We need to connect acts to what we want to see. These are two students from Emerson College in Boston who, after the Boston Marathon bombing that happened in 2013, which was a block away from where our university is, right in the middle of the city, they created a network campaign to fundraise, and they organized with all these communities. And these two students started to create T-shirts, and they gave $1 million to the survivors of this. Just two students sitting in a dorm using technology and finding a way to act. And so this is meaningful. So in this 5A cycle, we start with access. We go to awareness of values. We understand the complications of deconstructing. But we also appreciate what involvement means. And we understand acting as more than simply clicking or resharing or retweeting. And so in the end, I want to leave you guys, since this is kind of a foundational frame, we put a lot out there. And I'm happy to share that with you. But this idea that if we want to maximize the benefits and minimize the harms of connection, we have to take responsibility for shaping the tools we use to encounter. Same as what I said at the beginning with Howard Rheingold, but a little bit different. And in tomorrow's talk, I will talk more about how that shaping of tools can happen and what that means for engaging, for meaningful engagement in the world. So I'm going to stop there because I'm getting the stop sign. And thank you all for listening. It's been a pleasure to speak with you this morning. Okay, and and I'm happy to talk with anyone over lunch or later in the program.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Okay.
So it's lunchtime. بس قبل ما